Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 2020 Florida Conversations November. I am Nancy Dallance, Director of Education here at the Tampa Bay History Center, and I am in the Touchton Map Library in the research room here, available by appointment if you'd like to do your research here. So we're so glad that you could join us. We are videoing, we're showing this live in November 18th, but we are recording for future viewings. So thank you very much for joining us. We have sponsors that help us with the Florida Conversation series, and that would be WUSF Public Broadcasting, as well as USF Special Collections and the library there. So thank you very much to those guys. They help us put on and promote these great programs. So programming this fall has gone virtual, as with everybody else. We've had some wonderful presentations, and we will have a few more. So next month on December 9th, we will have Dr. Gary Marmino, our friend, and he is a wonderful person with a lot of great stories, and he will be talking about his newest book, and that is Millard Fillmore Caldwell, Governing on the Wrong Side of History. So I hope you can join us for that next month. We also have a lot of other programs. We've got book groups and walking tours, Girl Scouts, and in-gallery things. So please check our website for those things to check in on. Today's topic is very interesting. So if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we will get to those at the end. So earlier this year, history was being made, not just with the pandemic of 2020. Yep, our governor, Ron DeSantis, and lawmakers were able to put in an order that all Florida students would have to learn about the Ocoee Massacre of 1920. That's pretty remarkable that this is put into their curriculum. So this being an election, thought it would be very helpful to bring in Pam Schwartz to tell us about her topic and her exhibit. So Pam is the Chief Curator at the Orange County Regional History Center in Orlando, Florida. The name is very similar to ours. She's originally from Iowa, but has moved and lived in a lot of places from Maine to London. She got her Master's of Museum Studies at Seton Hall University in New Jersey. So, and her first museum directorship was at age 23. So she has done a lot in a short amount of time. So thank you very much for joining us, Pam. One more thing, the exhibit that all of her research and information is about is called Yesterday This Was Home, the Ocoee Massacre of 1920. It opened on October 3rd, and according to them, it'll be open until February 14th. They have extended hours and timed admission tickets, so it seems like a very safe place. Some staff and docents from the History Center here went over and saw it, and I can tell you it is amazing, and you're going to get to see a bit of it tonight. So that's awesome. So welcome, Pam. Very, very, very nice to have you here with us. I thought maybe you could just start out and just tell us a little bit about the event, the massacre itself, because I'm sure not everybody knows about it, and how this topic came to find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I feel honored to be here and get to talk to everybody. So thank you for having me, and thank you for that introduction. So the History Center, our staff, actually technically began this endeavor about 3 years ago. There's a variety of different groups in and around the Orlando area who were aware of the Ocoee Massacre. One of those groups, called the Democracy Forum, actually had done some research in the late 1990s, early 2000s, and they held some town halls. They held meetings about this event because so many people locally had never heard of the massacre. Now, this is 20 years ago. And people in the community, some of them weren't ready to hear about the massacre, or to, as they say, it might be better to let sleeping dogs lie. So the work that they were doing was really difficult, but they started amassing research. And when they came to us about 3 years ago to donate that to our archives and said, 2020 will be the 100th year mark of this event, we really think it's time to bring better visibility to the event and to start talking more about it. And so we said absolutely, and that's sort of how it began for us, was with these different local groups. It was Democracy Forum, the Alliance for Truth and Justice, and several other groups. And so the research got underway, and we kind of had to start from scratch. The thing about the Ocoee Massacre, like Rosewood, like Tulsa, they're more recently known, but there was a lot that was intentionally obfuscated about the event. So much misinformation, intentionally or otherwise. And so we really had our work cut out for us. And we ended up sort of broadening the actual exhibition. So if anybody has had the chance or gets the chance to come over for the exhibit, it actually covers from enslavement in the 1500s right here in Florida, all the way up through the Black Lives Matter movement today. Because we thought we would have so little with which to really tell the Ocoee story, we decided to expand and provide context. If you've heard of Tulsa, Rosewood, the Red Summer, any of these other events of racial terror, you know that they don't happen in a vacuum. They don't just, it's not an accidental event, if you will. There's a lot of things that lead up to it. And so we really expanded from there. And just, pardon my dog, there's no stopping that. I told Nancy that that was going to happen. So that's Donkey. Excuse her, as long as she's quiet with that toy. But excuse me, one of the very first exercises, and I'd like to share my screen if I may.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, and show you an image. So this is a one shot of the exhibit, and I'm going to do a kind of a quick walkthrough of the exhibit in just a few moments. But one of the really early exercises that we did was looking at all the versions of this story. So if you Google the Ocoee Massacre, you'll find on one hand very little, and on one hand a lot that isn't necessarily true. So we made a very intentional decision early on that we really wanted to focus on the facts. We wanted to focus on primary resources. We wanted to focus on those elements that there were no questions about, in a way, right? Things that everybody agreed on. And so this wall, sort of on the left-hand side of the image, you see it's hard to read, and I apologize for that. But we took 129 versions of this story and we synthesized them into one mass account. And so each one of those lines that you see are different ways. It's sort of like one of those choose your own adventure stories. If you've ever read, like, you can go down the dark hallway or you can go behind door number 2. And so we took them and we put them all together, and it created like 14 pages of text. And each one of those is cited. You see the screen on the wall there. That's a resource screen. All 129 of those accounts, whether they're a thesis, a magazine, an oral history, you can click and view it or listen to it. And so this really, to us, related a lot to today with the proliferation of misinformation and how easy it is to just hit that send or hit that share button without checking your facts. So what we did from this synthesis of all of these accounts is we boiled them all back, and we boiled it down to only what we could prove through primary resources or what all of the accounts generally agreed upon. And that's what you have at the right-hand side. Those 4 short paragraphs are what we can factually say about the event. So again, this was a huge project for us that we really started early on, was trying to figure out, what do we need to focus on in this exhibit? What are the elements of truth? So that will lead me right into, I'm just going to give a very brief account of Ocoee. And really this is the factual account. There are a lot of nuances. Many of those 129 stories have elements of truth, or somebody's truth, right? Which are sometimes different things. But just so everyone's familiar, as we can continue to talk through this, we as historians at the time of the opening of this exhibition, and we're learning still, this is what we felt we could factually say about what had happened. Now, there's a lot of context leading up to this. I'm only going to cover over the actual days of the massacre. So it begins 100 years ago on Election Day, November 2nd, 1920. Moses Norman, a Black labor broker in Ocoee, attempted to exercise his legal right to vote in his town. He's turned away. He's not permitted to cast that vote for a possible variety of reasons. there's a lot of versions of what might have happened next. All we know is for sure that later on that evening, after the polls close, an armed group of white men goes to the home of Norman's likely friend and fellow labor broker. This man's name is July Perry. He's another Black man living in Ocoee. Violence breaks out. There's shooting, there are fires started. This white mob essentially attacks the community of Ocoee, who's really not been set up to defend themselves. Black residents are forced to flee from their home and from their community. So July Perry, badly injured by bullet wounds, is captured by armed men and taken into custody. After receiving some level of medical attention, he's left in a cell at the Orange County Jail in downtown Orlando. According to a state of Florida, excuse me, according to a state of Florida coroner's inquest that took place on November 3rd, it's an unidentified mob who removes him from his cell, a lynch mob. This mob takes July Perry, they brutalize him, and by November 3rd, they had hanged his body in public view. It's later removed to Greenwood Cemetery where he is buried. Moses Norman, you'll recall from the beginning of the story, flees the area. He's later found in Duval County and further on in New York City, so he does survive, though original stories say that he had been murdered. The two of the white men from this white mob, an unknown size, but two of those white men are shot and killed, Leo Beauregard and Elmer McDaniels. And then after this, while this event is happening, able-bodied ex-servicemen are called and they surround the perimeter. Now that's to what? Hold down the crime scene? Or is it to keep Black people from returning to their homes, their possessions, and possibly even their loved ones? Nobody was allowed in and nobody was allowed out.
Of the area, excuse me for interrupting, but you said hold the perimeter of the town, of the area?
Of the community, the area where the carnage was happening. Now, there are reports that there was also boundaries set up to like Apopka and other communities so people couldn't enter them when they were fleeing. But again, all of those, we aren't sure of all the exact details, but an area of able-bodied white ex-servicemen is set up.
Is Ocoee right near downtown Orlando? Or how far would you say it is for?
Ocoee's about 14 miles, let's see, northwest or so of Orlando. So it's part of Orlando now. At the time, it would have been basically a different community. It was not a city yet. It didn't get incorporated as a city really till 23 or 1925.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the story you're telling right now is from that election day. And so you have suspicions that events prior to that election day may have triggered this? We don't have time to go into it, but was it just that or was it something bigger than that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, we don't know factually what caused this event. We know what people have said, which is that Moses Norman tried to vote and was not allowed to. And so then he in turn gets violent. But there's a lot going on, not only in Central Florida, in Ocoee, and Central Florida, the state of Florida, and the nation. You've got the end of World War I, which has really done a lot to different people in terms of the economy and the job market, people moving around, and things like that. There's women's suffrage. There's these Black voter registration drives happening all over, but very specifically in Florida, which Ocoee would have played a role in. And so there's a lot of things. I always refer to it as a simmering kettle. There's these things, and all throughout this time, you're also seeing a rise and a new resurgence of white supremacy activity and Ku Klux Klan, which was happening in Central Florida, also very much in Tampa. We feature a variety of stories actually in the exhibition that go back to Tampa, and there's a community at the time was called Peck outside of Tampa that there's some really horrific, what was called white capping stories, but essentially white cappers went on to become the inspiration and or the Ku Klux Klan in a way. So it was happening. There's a lot of good things and a lot of bad things all percolating at once.
Mm-hmm. Well, I interrupted you. I want to see the exhibit. Can you show people a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. The one final thing I guess I would round up on that's really dynamic about the story is that we don't know, and we will probably never know, as with many of these types of events across the nation, how many Black people were actually killed. So, excuse me. What we do know is that July Perry was murdered and lynched, and we do know that at least 3 other Black individuals were murdered that night, because we happen to have a Carrie Hand Undertaker's memoranda that states that, and we'll can kind of come back to that. But let me see if I can bring up the video here. Are you seeing this all right?
Yes, we are. That's wonderful. That's the entrance, as I remember.
Yes, this is the entrance to the exhibition. This is a 5-minute video. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'll kind of skip through. Hopefully it doesn't make anyone seasick. This is not high production value, folks. This was done on my cell phone. But this is the entrance to the exhibit. And Nancy, feel free to interrupt me if there's something that, having seen the exhibit, you think would be great to point out. In this entrance, on the right-hand side, you'll see a voting station. We have these placed throughout the exhibit, and they're places where you can kind of more deeply explore some of the content, but it's a place where you're asked to vote. And so we put these things in exhibits that are symbolic in a way, or we hope people notice, that people probably never notice. But you'll notice on top of this voting station, there's a light bulb. The idea is you're going to be drawn to the light, or like you're going to come here and turn on the light switch and have an idea. Each of these are places we want you really to stop and pause and think, but also to raise your voice and express your opinion and vote. And at the end of the small little activities, you can actually see how you line up, how your answers line up to other people who've been through the exhibition. So we'll move right in. You'll see the colors throughout the exhibition are very rich. That was a very, every single thing about this was a very intentional design decision. Even all of the wood you see here is all hand distressed and stained by our staff. So again, it gets a little smoother, I promise. Close your eyes if it's too much. But this is, yes, the entrance to the exhibition. It's also a sort of a darker exhibit. We wanted it to have, again, a little bit more of a somber mood. As we move through, I'm not going to give you the full tour. That's not why we're here. But basically, this is where the exhibition starts, and with enslavement in about 1513. Again, those first ships coming into St. Augustine. So this whole little area right here actually covers from enslavement all the way up through the end of the Civil War. We cover a lot of ground in a very small area. But again, this is that first section. This is the section starting at 1500 that takes you through the context that leads up to this moment, which, you know, Nancy had just asked and we were just talking a little bit about. Each of the sections is divided by color. So red is sort of pre-Ocoee, blue is Ocoee, and then purple is post-Ocoee. We really used a lot of large imagery in this exhibition. We wanted people to really sort of feel immersed in this history. There's the whitecapping story about Tampa. Another of the voting stations. I'll stop here. Sorry, that's not clear. This voting station, we actually talk right in this whole area you're seeing a lot about voter suppression. So that is obviously a big deal with the Ocoee story, because that's sort of supposedly what kicks it off. But voter suppression was a really terrible thing. I mean, we still have issues with voter suppression today, but on this voting station are actually questions we pulled from historic literacy tests that Black people may have been forced to try to pass in order to be able to vote. We also have poll tax receipts and white primary ballots and a variety of different things.
Were these specific to Florida, the ones you researched and drew from?
Like these poll taxes and white primary ballots that are here on the left are all from our personal collection. We weren't able to find copies of Florida literacy tests. Some of them are Alabama, Louisiana, but there are some really oppressive tactics. I'll stop there a second, give everybody a break. Some oppressive tactics that happen here, especially for young Black women. Of course, women's suffrage, with that's a whole new voters block. And that really caused a lot of tension locally because, you know, Black voters had typically voted Republican at the time. And so having all of these new women coming in, but there were tactics put in place. Like they would ask a young Black woman coming up to vote if she lived in precinct 10. And she'd say, yes, because she didn't know. And they'd say, nope, you live in precinct 13. You don't get to vote. And we're also going to arrest you for election fraud. Or for voting fraud. And so there was all of these different barriers. And we actually, there are stories about that happening, say in DeLand and here locally. those different types of things.
So in 1920, that was the first time many people were allowed to vote. Is that correct?
Allowed, I would say, with gentle care,
Right.
because we all know that though Black men were to have had voting rights up until this point, all of these suppression tactics, of course, don't allow for that. But for women, yeah, certainly Black and white, this was supposed to have been the first time they could legally cast their votes. So kind of moving on from that first section, we actually step back here a second to sort of set the pace for Ocoee. So we bring that first section up to 1920, but then we step back to 1850 with the sort of founding of the Ocoee area. And it's founded by white individuals, but by 1880 or so, there are many Black families moving into the area, working and starting to purchase properties. So one of the points I think is really important about the Ocoee massacre is that some of the main players that we see in 1920 actually had been in Ocoee for 30 years. These people had known each other and been neighbors for 30 years. This wasn't young people getting in fights. This wasn't new neighbor problems. These are literally people who had been living in a community together, working side by side, living on each other's properties, Black and white, for some 30 years. These are 50 to 90-year-old individuals who are really involved with this event.
And what was the industry of Ocoee at that time?
Largely agricultural pursuits. So a lot of citrus groves. There was also turpentine locally, and other forms of farming, pineapple and things like that, but timber mills. So there was a variety of things, but mostly all along the lines of agriculture. Yeah. So then we go from there and we bring back up to these stories. I wish that sort of froze a little bit better. Sorry, technology. But we talk about World War I, and we talk about white supremacy. And again, all of these things that led up to Ocoee. I do want to point out in the middle, and I apologize, it's not clearer. See if I can get any better here. Nope. This panel in the center with the two white men on the side, this is maybe one of the more important artifacts in the exhibit, but this is actually a letter that was sent to these two white gentlemen. These men had been lecturing in the Black community about how to vote and trying to enfranchise voters. And that letter is actually a copy we have of the original we have the original in our collection from the Ku Klux Klan telling them to stop or else. So we know leading up to the massacre that there were threats by the Ku Klux Klan towards not only the Black, but also the white community in terms of relationships.
Wow, impressive. Did you have that in your collection prior to this research and this work?
Yeah, and believe it or not, when we first had it, it kind of went unknown for a while. I wasn't here then, excuse me, but once it was found, it was a pretty incredibly awful discovery, but it's a very important artifact that we have. And we have a lot of the papers of Judge John Chaney, as well as his son and family members in the collection, right? So that was about a month before the massacre happens, and the newspaper articles just next to it, those are from just days before. And that was a Ku Klux Klan march through Orlando. They also had them in Daytona, Jacksonville. I don't know about Tampa, but maybe. And basically those parades, as they call them, were all with that same sentiment of warning Black voters not to come out. So we have proof of the month ahead and days ahead that there were definitely intimidation tactics in place from the Ku Klux Klan. So we'll kind of
beautiful
move around the corner here. We already talked about this. Like I said, you can actually walk right up to the resources screen here.
Pam, I see some white writing as well as the yellow there. Is that a distinction of?
Yeah, so the yellow are all the versions of the story, and the white is actually the parts we pulled out that are the facts. So when you look at the wall from a little bit further away, the yellow are all the versions, and what you see with the white, those are the factual pieces. So the wall actually reads from right to left because of how you enter in the exhibit. You'll notice how many versions of the beginning of the story there are. And then when it gets to the end of the story, there are a lot less versions, right? Because there's a lot more white in that area. So that's something that's a little bit interesting of how wild things began when nobody knew what was going on versus later on in the story. move a little bit faster there. I think I bring up one of the resources here. So this is what that screen looks like. They're all attached to a number, and then you can view the actual full resource. And one of our goals for this exhibit by the time it closes in February is actually to create a full digital storytelling multimedia website. And so this will actually live there. So you'll be able to, there's a better shot of that KKK letter. You'll actually be able to explore any one of these 129 resources straight from our website.
So at the moment, nothing's on the website besides the announcement of the exhibit and things, but
Yep.
Eventually you will.
Yeah, just the exhibit and our events right now. We do have a lot of good events like this Saturday. We actually have a free family day. We'll be open. You have to reserve your timed entry ticket, but we are free. So a lot of good stuff coming up. And as soon as we have a website available, we'll certainly be putting all of this content on there available.
Well, I know what we're looking at right now is a special feature of the exhibit. Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so on the right, you see is the cabin. The exhibit is called Yesterday This Was Home, the Ocoee Massacre of 1920. And that is a bit of a nod to a lot of different things. It's another sort of, in a way, like an Easter egg for us. So it's both like really literal, but also symbolic in the way that people's sense of home, sense of place has been ripped from them in the Black community. So on the right, this cabin we built is not period, but it is meant to sort of evoke this idea that you're walking into the community of Ocoee. And you'll notice on this side that the cabin is really sort of clean and pristine and nice. As we transition through the Ocoee story, you're going to start to see that the cabin is sort of burnt away. And the idea is that you're entering into the prosperity of Ocoee, and you're exiting through the ruin and loss that just took a series of hours and a series of hours to rip away from that Black community. So I'll touch on that a little bit on the other side, because you see this idea of the loss of home, the loss of prosperity over and over again throughout this exhibit, because of course that was one of the main intentions of the white population, was to keep the Black community suppressed and to not take too much of the wealth that they seemed to think should have belonged to them.
Okay.
So on the left, I think this is maybe some of the most important work that the History Center did in this exhibit. I think it's all very important. We worked very, but this talks about the land ownership in Ocoee. Every Black person in Ocoee that night lost something, whether they were renters or landowners or just visiting. This chart here in the middle, actually, we extensively researched over 160 land deeds, and we transcribed them and we mapped them. And I'll show you the map here in a second. It's on the video. But what we found is that there's at least 26 landowning families for over 370 acres. And we've changed this text panel. We put it up with Velcro because we knew we were going to keep finding things. And so now, right now, our current calculations are that the property that was owned by Black individuals living in Ocoee at the time of the massacre would be worth over $10 million today if it had not been ripped from them. So we, talking about the loss of generational wealth and that impact on the families, several of which we're in touch with, and I'll talk again about a little bit later in the exhibit here. So again, we took the time to, oh, I guess I don't use the map. I'm gonna share that though. I think I have that. Yeah, here we go. This is the map we built. And I'll go through it really briefly, but I do think it's really an important visual for the exhibition, that we start with all white ownership in November of 1888. And what you can see is a few different things with this exhibit or with this map is, as I scroll through the timeline, you're going to see this 30-year rise in prosperity. And then you'll see just 6 years that it took for the entire Black community to move out and the white community to retake that land. But as I move through, as you start to see the yellow pop up, you'll see that that's Black land ownership. So 30 years it took for the community to build and build and build. And then when we get to the point of the massacre, this is generally what we believe the Black land ownership. This doesn't include renters, because of course we'll never really know. But in the exhibition, you can actually click any of these properties and see who owned it, how many acres, who they purchased it from when. So this was purchased for $200 from a white couple to a black couple, sold 17 months after the riot for $5. Likely not so much by choice at a 99% loss. But that property's worth $715,000 today. Now, we've given tours to several descendant family members, and this is a really difficult thing. Some of the families lost what would be $2.5 million. So imagine somebody sitting here saying, you probably should have been a millionaire at this point, right? But that's really, really important. So I won't go too further deep into that. But again, in just 6 years, from all of this prosperity you see in the Black community is gone.
So by 1928 or so,
About
no Black families?
1926 is when we have the last real land deed. There's some land ownership like further south of some of those same families, but roughly 1926 is the last sale. And for the next half of a century, 50 years, there's not another known Black person to own land or really live for any extensive amount of time in Ocoee due to how racist the area was.
Wow.
So flipping back over here, we go through land, we go through the deaths. So this is the Carrie Hand Undertaker's memoranda for the death of the Black individuals. We talk about voting. I'll pause here just a second. Ugh, this is such bad video quality. This whole area here, that you were seeing, I should have just brought up stills. This is where we talk about the dark legacies of the Ocoee event, because even though the event only happens over a few nights, the terror lasts for a very long time. The story's always gone that all the Black people fled immediately, and that's not true. As we just heard, it goes through 1926 or more. But on this wall, we actually feature each of the descendant families that we've had the honor of speaking with and meeting. We've done oral histories with them about what their family story is and what they know. We do feature, July Perry. July Perry is the man who's lynched. His land is taken and given to a white person for executorship. His wife, Estelle Perry, and daughter Caritha, they're actually captured the night of the massacre, and they're brought to the jail in Tampa. And the reason they're taken to Tampa is supposedly for their quote unquote safekeeping, but also because they're basically wanted for the murder of the white men who were killed, which they're kept in jail for almost a month in Tampa. And supposedly a white mob comes from Orlando and tries to access them and say, hey, we're here. And to the credit of that jailer, he turns them away because there's no warrant, and they never return again, which can tell you a little bit about what they were probably intending to do with Caritha and Estelle, who had recently talked with members of the Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, who ultimately did not do anything with their testimony or really care about what they had to say, but the idea that they were talking. So there's several different Tampa ties. They end up staying in Tampa. A lot of the families that left went to Hillsborough County, some to Tampa, some St. Pete's, some out and around the county, but people kind of spread all over. And we've found people in several different states. This is another area of the exhibit since this video we are changing, because we've had the opportunity to meet a few more different descendants.
To the ladies that were in jail in Tampa, did they end up safe and back in Orlando area, Ocoee at some point, or?
They would not have been safe had they come back. So they were there for about a month. And then after the grand jury was held, they were released. They were found, again, the white men, the Black people, everybody was found murdered or terrorized by unknown parties. So they are released. And again, they stay in Hillsborough for a little bit. And then they leave, but they are released safely. But again, keep in mind, Estelle no longer has a husband. Her home's been burned down. All of their property is under the executorship of a white man who auctions it off. It takes 12 years for those descendants to see any money from the sale of those properties. And they get about $125 each, even though the properties have been sold for thousands. So they kind of go on and basically have to restart their life again.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So each of the photos here on the left are pictures of people who survived this event, whose descendants we've spoken with. And we have quotes. I love this one in the middle. Learning from the Ocoee Massacre. It was hard, it was horrible, and it was sad, and then it taught strength. That is from a great granddaughter, Camilla Wilson Barnes. But each one of those quotes is important because at the end of the day, the History Center knows this isn't our story. Really, it's their story to tell of the impacts of and the legacies of what happened. On the right, you'll see where the cabin is sort of starting to be burnt away here as we go around the corner. And we mentioned that Ocoee is all white for the next half a century. We did an oral history with a gentleman who moved into Ocoee as a black teenager. And he said the experience was like sticking his finger in an electrical socket.
Wow.
That's in the late 1970s still.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And he tells so many really unfortunate stories of their time in the 70s and early 80s in Ocoee. Yeah.
Wonderful. Just let me remind viewers, if you have some questions, please put them in the Q&A part and we will address those in just a little bit.
Yeah. And we'll go through this last section a lot more quickly. This is the post-Ocoee section. We talk about other lynchings in Central Florida. The map over on the left actually covers the entire United States and lynchings. You'll notice the picture in front you've maybe seen before. That was the Rosewood Massacre. Of course, happens in 1923. People have heard of Rosewood because it was in the media a lot more with a lot of similarities to Ocoee, but a big difference with Rosewood is, of course, that those descendants and survivors were successful in passing a claim bill and receiving some sort of a financial, they didn't call it reparation, but a reparation. They were financially repaired by the state.
Well, that is one question that somebody was asking, reparations in the Ocoee massacre case. Was that a conversation? Is it now?
It is becoming one. Yes. After Ocoee, people left and went everywhere. So there was no group here to, I think, kind of continue that conversation or to bring that up, really, because people are so spread out throughout the nation. And there's not really been a lot of things to look at. But now that we've created this map, and we know that land is worth over 10 million, and we are getting it closer and closer all the time to knowing who survived or who died and what actually happened. The more facts that we can uncover, the closer that people are to having that conversation, I think. And many of the families are understandably very interested in that. Again, when you are a great grandson and the survivors are the grandparents who raised you, and you say, I should have had $1.3 million in property. That's really a difficult conversation, right? And so I think those are conversations that are really starting to percolate, continuing to percolate, I should say. Originally, reparations were part of that House bill, 1213, not the same bill, but reparations with Senator Bracey were being put forth, and ultimately that part was dropped and the education carried forth. But I won't personally be surprised if that doesn't, be brought back up in conversations. So
the map on the left side of the screen there, that's very impressive. Did you say that you worked with somebody to help put that together and keep it updated?
So this is actually called the Monroe Works Today map. You can Google it. It's available online. It's really horrifically interesting. It has lynchings not only of the Black community, but Latinx and Native American and Chinese and other demographics. But it was built on a data set of Florence and Monroe work. And this was a Black couple who was doing research and documenting lynchings of individuals at a time when it was extraordinarily not safe to do so. He later worked for the Tuskegee Institute, which is where the data set lies. And there's a gentleman named RJ who's incredible. He's incredible. He took that data and he mapped it. And this is a 6-foot touchscreen in the exhibit. You can actually go up to it and click on any of these dots and learn more about the individual who was lynched. And RJ, though he made this map long before this exhibit and continues to update it and edit it, he helped us build our land deed map. And we were so impressed when we reached out and asked him if we could use this in the exhibit. We said, oh my gosh, who better to help us build our map? right? So he's really, really incredible. And it's again, Florence and Monroe work today, really amazing and interesting people to read about, but he's got a really cool website that you can go through and access that map.
And it covers what time frame? It's the whole United States and all
Yes, the
different
whole
groups.
United States. Yeah, I don't and the territories. I don't remember the exact dates, but I want to say it's roughly 1865, all the way up through the 1950s or 60s, because
Okay.
that's supposedly when the last lynchings happened. And like I said, I think we just don't call them lynchings anymore, but definitely similar events are still happening today. But that's
And
generally the
unfortunately, the definition of lynching is a little broader than maybe some people realize. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know that it's also very well defined. Lynchings are, essentially, murder based on race or otherizing. There's, terms like legal lynching that get put
Mm.
out. Sometimes somebody did go through a trial, but was it a legal due process trial where somebody was found guilty and then hanged? So there's kind of some nuances to that, but generally, lynching is a murder, and it's based on issues of race. So at
Right.
least as we carry it through this exhibition too. So yeah. So again, going quickly through, this whole right-hand section is really important. It's actually a time period, the 50s and 60s, called the Reign of Terror in Central Florida. The FBI called it that. It's a series of really horrific events: the Groveland Four, the bombing of the Cremette, the Mims bombing, Harry and Harriet Moore, who were murdered in Mims, Florida. Um, You'll see the cabin here again on the other side. Inside the cabin, we have really sensitive items, KKK items, photographs of lynchings. Again, it's this whole yesterday, this was home. Where does racism start? In the home. Where can racism be beaten or stopped? Inside the home. And so we chose to put all of these really horrific things that are really ways that society's complicit and complacent in hate and terror inside of there, but also to give people the choice on whether they wanted to access that or not. We go from there into civil rights in Central Florida, all the way around, and we bring our various themes: incarceration, education, property, labor, all the way up through to present day. And we ended up changing the end of the exhibit here, because of course, Black Lives Matter movement started here in Central Florida in Sanford, with the death of Trayvon Martin, with the murder of Trayvon Martin. When George Floyd happened, we sort of reacted to that and knew we needed to sort of change up our interpretation. And when George Floyd died, of course, there were also local Black Lives Matter protests. And I apologize, you can't see this photo better, but I think it's a really poignant end to the exhibition, because the young man in the middle of this recent photo at a George Floyd Black Lives Matter movement protest march in downtown Orlando is holding up a sign for July Perry. The
Wow.
fact that he knew about it, and it's 100 years later, almost to the year, 100 years later, and he felt compelled to carry that sign for July Perry, is really cool. And then, yeah, the very end is sort of here, where we talk about we all have a role to play, and we all need to act. And so we have these white cards down here, have different resources that you can take with you when you go. So I think that whole section sort of ended up being longer than I intended to, but that's a big walkthrough. I tried to give you some behind the scenes while we were doing it. So
Well, that is amazing. I think it's a very well designed and informative exhibit. Absolutely. Yeah, so just a few other questions maybe pertaining to that. I think you've covered a lot. The connections to Tampa, the two women that ended up in jail, I think that is the most of that story. Is that true?
well, yeah, I talked about white capping and some of the things. Believe it or not, if you look at the coverage about Ocoee Massacre in the newspaper, of course, it's very sensationalized. It's very white centric. The Orlando Sentinel, the day after, the headlines were "Racial Trouble" or "Race Trouble in Ocoee leaves 2 white men dead." Excuse me, was that really the most important thing about what happened? The headlines and the news in Tampa, in the Tampa paper, are worse they're incredibly racist. So if you go to if you're like a newspapers.com and you look up the Ocoee Massacre in the Tampa paper, so these white owned papers in Florida, the way that they were writing about this event is really appalling. And I will say our local Orlando Sentinel has really owned that. They said our paper is guilty and we need to do something. And so they've done this huge series of articles about the Ocoee Massacre and different things to sort of, I guess, try to repair that in a way. But there's a lot of connections to Tampa because, I mean, Tampa was the next town over, right? Really.
Right.
And so people were really talking about the types of things that happened in Ocoee over in Tampa, and had a lot of strong feelings.
Well, that is one of our folks asked a question of if there's been any formal apology. This is maybe a two-part question, though. A formal apology about the massacre from any governmental unit, any part of Orange County, or anybody?
Yeah, so believe it or not, so during the November 2nd, 3rd week, there were a lot of different events held. We had a panel with Senator Bracy, who put forth the reparations and things, and also Representative Geraldine Thompson, and different people. We had a panel, but Orange County held an event recognizing, it was called Honor Their Ancestors, and it invited as many of the descendants as we know of right now to come and speak on behalf of their family at the 100-year mark. So to let people hear them, and I think that's recorded. It's on YouTube under the Orange County TV if anybody's interested. But it was really powerful. 100 years later, to have these survivors' descendants come up, or in the case of July Perry, who was lynched, the family come up and speak. And so that was Orange County's event. That was really, really amazing. And then the city of Ocoee held several events throughout the week, but they did do a formal apology. They put up a historic marker right in front of the city hall area on the lake. And they also invited family members and presented them with a plaque that had a proclamation that was sort of denouncing the old sundown town that was Ocoee, and announcing it as a sunrise city. That formal apology, and a variety of different events and different things like that. So steps being taken. There's a lot of people who feel certain ways about what's enough, what's not enough. But there was an apology and those things. And several of the family did choose to attend and speak. And very, very interesting to be at those events and see them.
Absolutely. So just to make sure everybody's clear, your exhibit is in Orlando at the Orange County Regional History Center there. So good to know for that. So what do you think is the reason? Was it the end of the 100-year remembrance that really pushed the governor to sign the bill to have students learn about this? Was that what pushed it, or was there just an accumulation of interest and timing?
I think it's a lot of different things. One thing that I said in my remarks at the Honoring Their Ancestors is essentially, why did we have to wait 100 years? It's nice to put the bow on it, like 100 years, let's have the memorialization. It was far overdue for us. It was far overdue for Ocoee, and far overdue for Orange County and the families and everybody involved. But there's no better time than the present to recognize history. And so I think there's the impending 100-year mark. And I think 100 years makes you realize how long it's been since this could have had some, as much as you can write an event like this, but the visibility to it. And so I think some of it was also timing of the people learning about the story. So many people here don't know about it.
Well, that was my next question. Did you find that most of your visitors are somewhat aware, not at all aware? No.
So many people are like, I had no idea what I was walking into. And, Senator Bracy, again, so Representative Geraldine Thompson, she's known about the event because she was actually part of one of those groups in the 90s and 2000s. So some people knew about it, but with Bracy moving to Ocoee and finding out about this event. And so that's what sort of started to form this idea to put forth this bill for both reparations and education. So I think it's like a perfect storm, right? It's me being at the History Center. It's this group wanting to donate their archives because they're just sitting in the garage, and this person moving to Ocoee and learning, and this person being in the seat in the Senate or the House to try to put it forth. So it's like a perfect storm of players and people and facts and things just starting to really finally come out that I think has pushed all of this to sort of to culminate, right? But also 100 years, it's time,
Right.
past time.
Absolutely. Well, let's look. I think there's a few questions that I have had come in. Did you collect any oral histories from current residents of Ocoee whose ancestors participated, maybe white residents or moved black residents?
We are working on it. We have not had descendants of white perpetrators be particularly forthcoming. It's a lot harder to find people now. You can't pick up a phone book, right? To find someone's email address or cell phone. Sometimes we knock on doors, to be quite honest. Not right now because of COVID. That has been a tactic I've done in the past, not since February. But we find people through all different methods. And so, yeah, there actually very recently is a descendant of a surviving Black family who's recently moved back to Ocoee. Most people, Georgia, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, California, people are really spread out, St. Pete's. So we don't know. I mean, that's the only couple. There's some family here still in Plymouth. They went to Plymouth after Ocoee. But we have talked to several people who live in Ocoee now, who are either white or Black, didn't know when they moved back. We talked to the family who moved there in the 70s, and the family still lives there in Ocoee. So we've talked to a huge variety of people, but I gather we'll probably continue to do this for the next 4 or 5, however many years, as people find us and or are ready or are willing to speak to us.
Was there one story from one of the descendants that you could share with us, a little bit interesting, a little bit surprising? Just one.
All of them. How much time? This is a 4-hour program. No, these are all just really incredible people. One of the women who actually was here locally for a long time and did amazing stuff. I did like 9 hours of oral history with her because I couldn't stop talking to her. She's so lovely. Nana Patricia Watley. But they're all really interesting because they've been passed down, right? Sometimes things are lost with memory. Sometimes things are lost with trauma. Sometimes things are just maybe not heard right in the first place, right? So like there's all of these different things going on, but each one of the stories is really powerful. One of the gentlemen, Robert, who's descendant of the Hickey family, he came and he was in town for a limited time. He's from New York, but he plays golf on the Ocoee golf course. And that's sort of him taking back ownership, right? Like, I'll come here and I'll play golf, right? Which is kind of cool anyway. But I met him on the golf course because he told me he didn't have time. And I said, you've got time if I meet you out there. So I met him on the Ocoee golf course and we did an oral history together, which is like, I don't know, sort of a strange thing to do, but we did it. And he was actually raised by his grandparents who were the survivors. So he knew them. Sometimes people are like great, great, greats. They're so far removed. It's a story passed down, but he actually heard it from them. And they went to Apopka and they started over. He built the home with his hands and he started a new little grove and they just started over. And, he talks about his family's personality. And for us, that's really important because we don't want these people just to be names and acreages. They had lives, they had families, they had personalities and dreams that they were trying to live. And so, one of the things he talked about was how amazing his grandparents were and how hard they worked, but also that his grandfather always had a bit of bitterness. And Robert, long after our oral history, calls me right before the exhibit opens. I was standing in the gallery actually when he called and he goes, "Are you going to tell me?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "About the land. You said you were going to work on the land." And I said, "Are you sitting down?" And he said, "Well, do I need to be?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think so." And I said, "You should have had $1.3 million worth of property in Ocoee today." That's what his family owned. And it's just sort of a sigh, this sort of, oh, it's a lot to take on. And it's just like, wow, and as a museum curator, like that's not really a conversation that's like the thing that you're going to be talking about, but we put in, I don't even know how many hours of research in creating that map. And that's, again, part of giving the history back to the families. And so he's a really amazing guy. I did a virtual tour for 26 of his family members who are spread out all over. And for many of them, it was the first time they were really hearing the details of what happened. They knew something, but to really hear it and see it like that was really immensely impactful for them. And again, a little bit empowering in a way for them to get parts of their story back.
Wow. Amazing. Well, speaking of families and things, I know that you are thinking of your teachers and your families that'll come see the exhibit. And I believe you put together a really nice guide for them. Maybe is that available to the public? And what was your thoughts behind that? Being from the education department, of course, that's how I think.
Yeah, no, our education department is really incredible. And as we were working on this, I mean, even before the House bill was passed, they said, "Oh, we've got to create a curriculum and we've got to think about how we make this content accessible because it's really difficult history, right? But it's difficult history that young learners of any age can take something from depending on how you help them access it." And so they made a youth and family guide that is for educators or caregivers to go through the exhibit with the young learners and be able to digest this difficult content in an appropriate way. So that's sort of step one, and that's available in both English and Spanish. The entire exhibition is bilingual, available bilingual. We also have it in Spanish, but they've also already created a curriculum for teachers, and we're doing programs. So we filmed a virtual tour so that we can allow students to access that, because we had lined up for a lot of classes to
Yes.
come to the museum, and we were so excited because a lot of times museums get younger learners, fourth grade and so on, and we actually had this opportunity to bring high schoolers in for this content that they could really dig in with, and not so much now. But December 1st, we'll be holding some school programming with different schools with those curriculum. We're looking at writing additional curriculum. And because with the House bill, some things are going to be changing, right? We'll see what the recommendations from the state committee are about what that looks like. But we've got a variety of things available. Those will also all live online with the web version as well, so people can access those. And we've had a lot of teachers and educators reach out. And so if there are any of those here who are interested, you don't have to do all the research yourself. We've done it for you. That's a big thing. Teachers have a lot on their plate right now. And so we just said we need to create this in a way that can be really helpful and put all of the information at their fingertips that they need. So we're happy and willing to share those resources for sure.
Awesome. All right. That I think that is pretty much all of the questions that I have. You've covered so much territory, really a lot of information, sad, horrific, but I think in this day and age, it's very helpful for us to know and understand so we can move better and move forward in a better way. Any last comments to the audience?
I just want to say thank you to the Tampa Bay History Center and to the Tampa Bay History Center's sponsors and donors for making this possible and for supporting with such a wonderful institution. And thank you for having me. And if anybody's interested in more information, they can always reach out to the History Center. Keep in mind, we've got that free family day this Saturday if you're looking for a bit of a safe, socially distanced field trip. And a lot of really great things on our History at Home webpage too. We've got several events, other programs we've given around Ocoee, including the panel. So if you'd like to learn more, you can go also view the recordings of those programs as well. So if you can make it, if you feel comfortable doing so, we hope that you will. Let us know what you think. And if not, we will be doing a full virtual tour later in the new year. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you for everybody's interest. And do feel free to reach out if you have more questions.
Well, thank you very much, Pam Schwartz. We really appreciate it. Have a great night.
You too.